Travel with me to Columbus, Ohio during the 1930s. Imagine a city that shows so much promise for people of color, adopting federal policies and practices that included creating maps of areas where no money would be lent for home ownership. Neighborhoods where no investment would go were outlined in red. These neighborhoods were determined solely based on race and were said to be infiltrated by hazardous populations. Redlining was how structural racism was designed into cities, and the city of Columbus was not exempt from these practices. YWCA Columbus would like to welcome you to Undesign the Redline Columbus, an interactive exhibit that explores the history of structural racism and inequality. These designs compound each other from the 1938 redlining maps until today. We must come together to undesign these systems with great intentionality to confront our past and to construct our future. Brought to you by YWCA Columbus and a host of community sponsors, we invite you to learn the history of Columbus, interact with this exhibit, and think about and share your ideas of undoing these structural inequities. Welcome to Undesign the Redline Columbus.
We really hope that the exhibit can serve as a platform for having these conversations and really moving forward with solutions and big changes. It's not just about, talk, it's also about action, and one of the amazing things is to see how many different places it's going, how many different organizations, the city, others that are engaging in this in a way that will lead to hopefully transformative change. And that's going to take everyone in Columbus, so we really encourage you to come see the exhibit, engage with it, and engage with what comes next.
When people try to see inequality as a result of personal deficits or cultural flaws, reject that. That's hatred, that's bias, that's discrimination. We have to understand that inequality is the result of systems and practices, and we have to address systemic racism that still persists.
My dad was a retired military veteran and ended up moving to Columbus from West Virginia after he got out of World War II. And he had $3,000 saved from his military days to buy an $8,000 house, but no bank would finance $5,000.
But this area was redlined, and after going to all of the financial institutions in town at that time, he was refused over and over.
The guy that owned the house had his brothers pull together, and they got a loan from the bank for $5,000, and he paid them the $5,000 back for the house.
The great part of the story is Jordan's father, who couldn't get a loan from the bank, even though he had more than 40% put down, eventually became the president of the bank and is now involved in building a new bank.
My father was an Italian immigrant. He came to this country when he was 7 years old, and he really believed strongly in the ownership of a home as being the American dream. And I realize now, even being part of this committee, even before that, he didn't have the obstacle of not being able to get financing. It was never a question whether or not he could live in the neighborhood he wanted to live in.
The exhibit is very, very powerful. I mean, it's a history that everyone should know. And the reason why people should know this history is because it's not just history. It affects today, it affects the present, it affects the lives of the people who live there right now, as well as the lives of the people who were displaced by redlining and also by highway construction. So it's really important for people to realize what has happened in our community so that we can move to try to make the situation better.
My family grew up in Hanford Village. It was a community. They had their own mayor, their own fire, their own police, their own grocery stores. It was a very self-sufficient black middle-class community. And my mother can recall in the 1950s sitting on the steps of her great-grandparents' home, hearing about the construction of the freeway and thinking how sad it's going to be to scatter the community. Hanford Village is very important to why I'm involved in this project.
I'm a former owner of Urban Spirit Coffee Shop, and at that time, you saw this influx of entrepreneurs coming in, taking on storefronts, doing murals in the neighborhood. And right when we got our wheels under us, freeway construction happened again. The grandmothers and grandfathers could not afford the property taxes. They started to give people vouchers to encourage them to move to the suburbs, and it disproportionately affected Black entrepreneurs who were trying to be a part of the so-called revitalization.
Redlining and restrictive covenants paved the way to deny groups of people access to wealth building. There is a current wave of victimization that is happening in our low-income neighborhoods today. And we look at neighborhoods like the Near East Side and Linden, and there's a large number of those properties that are being purchased by real estate investment corporations from outside the state, which means we need to do something more in the present to build the city of the future that is worthy of human affection and the city that we will be proud to live in.
We had, segregated housing where you weren't allowed to buy houses outside of a certain area, restrictive covenants, messages in the lease that you would sign if you wanted to buy a house that said you were not going to sell to anyone not of the white race. And I still have a deed like that we had to sign.
At the time that I went to school, African Americans weren't allowed to stay in the dormitories at OSU.
A lot of people don't see the direct correlation between redlining in housing and the school segregation that occurred here in Columbus. In May of 1971, Linda McKinley High School was seeing some of the changes from the housing changes due to white flight and block busting. The neighborhood had turned from primarily white to primarily Black neighborhood. And those changes were being seen in the school, but equal rights were not being seen as well.
So as the auditor office continues to perform our statutory functions, we are adapting and updating our policies and procedures to take into account the role that redlining has played to seek equitable solutions so that our community has more confidence and we're able to make small incremental improvements to that process so that the historic impact is minimized as much as possible.
We're so excited to be partners with the YWCA on their upcoming program, Undesigning the Redline. We are that common ground where people can come in and learn about the issues of the day. The YWCA is such a credible partner. We have so much admiration for the work that they do and what they stand for in this community, and we're standing tall with them for Undesigning the Redline.
We've got a lot of challenges, from racial inequality, economic inequality, the climate crisis, and we know that housing is a major issue, especially when it comes to affordable housing. And so we can't just see the policies of the past like redlining and not also look at policies like exclusionary zoning practices that continue to keep communities divided. And ultimately, if we want to have a growing multiracial democracy in which all people can thrive, we have to ensure that people have places to live safely and securely and have the economic security to be successful and to live up to their full potential.